Well, Scarbs, brilliant to see Force India finally with their new car, the big talking point of the British Grand Prix, the build-up to the British Grand Prix. We saw a lot of that in the post-Austria test as well. It's a B-spec car. They're calling it a B-spec car, although various parts of the car seem to have got other names already within the factory.
Yeah, everything has changed on the car, apart from probably the tub, really. All the aero surfaces, the structure of the nose and the rear suspension geometry are all new, so it's very much a completely new car. And yeah, they've got some unusual names. That the nose, which we'll come to talk about, which is probably the most talked about element of the update. Force India called it the Cobra nose originally because of the shape of the shoulders of the nose tip, and they're now calling the new version with the nostrils, I guess we were describing them as the vented Cobra nose. So yeah, it's a kind of fairly racy name, isn't it?
Well, racy name and racy look too. I think it is, with the colour scheme as well, it is probably one of the best looking cars out there now. It's a lovely looking nose. I can imagine Ron Dennis looking at the pictures now and saying, why haven't we got a nose like that on our car? Perhaps. I mean, bearing in mind McLaren had got a fairly simple short nose version, pretty much like the rest of the grid. But this one is different. And initially you were interested in it from a legal point of view as well.
Yeah, when we first saw the nose in testing, it wasn't quite clear what was going on. We already knew that Williams were testing with some what would be illegal race parts in order to get an aerodynamic effect for testing, and we thought this may be the case with the nose. But having looked at the way that they actually shaped it and how the bodywork that forms these ducts through the nose overlap, it's actually completely legal. And as much as the rules are aimed to try and prevent holes in the nose, the regulations actually say the nose, if you took a slice along its length, it must have just one section. So you couldn't have a hole that had, you know, a section at the front and then another section at the back unconnected. So Force India have been very clever to actually get the right shape there, and it is completely legal. And as you say, I think a lot of other teams will be going and have a look at this now and thinking if it is something that they can introduce into their noses. Looking at the Force India nose and what I know of the other teams, both potentially Williams and Toro Rosso, have got a nose structure that could actually invite using this. And in its aerodynamic advantage, it effectively makes the nose shorter as far as the airflow is concerned, without actually having to physically create a short nose, which, as we know, is very hard to pass the crash test.
Well, that was going to be my next question. How difficult or easy has this nose been for crash testing?
As much as it looks like the old nose with a couple of holes made in it, internally it's a completely new structure, and this kind of bridge you see in between the two nostrils is part of the primary crash structure. So it's been a task. It had to go through all new crash tests, and there were slightly more radical versions of it, which will then start to create some problems, particularly with the nose push-off test, which is part of the various crash tests that the nose has to undergo. But because the nose effectively is still longer, it's that little bit easier to pass the crash test than trying to get it done with a much shorter nose. But they're getting the aerodynamic advantage, almost, of a short nose with that design.
Do you get the impression that they created that nose in the tunnel, they tested that nose in the tunnel, found excellent results, and then have reprofiled the car around that nose? Or do you see the rest of the revisions on the car being in some ways separate but related, if you see what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it probably did lead a lot of it, because obviously the nose and the front wing have a big impact on the airflow that goes downstream to the arguably much more important aero parts at the back of the car. But they probably were already thinking about what they would do with the rear aero based on either that nose or a short nose. So they probably always had something in mind to change the front end of the car. It's just this is the one that they've ended up with.
And what is your general feeling about this car now? You've always liked this. You always liked the way Force India have been going and handled their relatively low budget season. And what's your feeling about this?
Well, I mean, I was speaking to Andy Green at the team last night, and you know, they've now been working in the Toyota wind tunnel in Cologne rather than their own wind tunnel, still with a 50% scale model. But they were finding that all of the work that they'd done this year and introduced onto the A-spec car, as we can now call it, were working. So already yesterday, after just on Friday, just a few days of testing, they're finding that the results from the new car matching what they were expecting. So this is a really positive sign, and it's really going to boost them up the grid, because they've been very much running the same spec of car all year, and this is obviously round 9, so we're now having a big step. And they've got more parts coming. They've got parts coming for Spa. After the summer break, they're also going to go to a 60% scale model in the wind tunnel as well, which will also help their results. And it looks like, rather unusually for Force India, you tend to start the season very well, but don't have the development through the season, throughout the full year. This year, they're actually going to have a very strong finish to the season. And looking how, the competitiveness of people like Toro Rosso and Red Bull means that Force India could have a really strong finish to the year.
It's good to see a great bunch of people there at every level, whether it be sporting, technical, managerial. And also, I think worth making the point that as the season's progressed so far, Silverstone isn't going to be the sort of circuit on which the car would have shone. Typically, it's gone well on slower circuits. And here we've had Nico Hülkenberg qualifying the top 10 at Silverstone. So if anything is really a tick in the box for this new car, it's got to be that performance. That's one point. And the other point, of course, is that the other team using the Toyota Cologne wind tunnel is McLaren. But the word at McLaren at the moment here at Silverstone is no power, but also no grip.
Yeah, I mean, McLaren seem to be struggling on all fronts this year, which is obviously terrible to see. But a wind tunnel, it's not the wind tunnel itself, it's how you operate it. There's various facets to how you get good results out of this. Force India have obviously got, some good surfaces they've created. They've got a good wind tunnel program going on in Cologne. They've obviously now got these out to the track, and everything seems to be working for them. So, all reward to them for doing such a good job.
The Ferrari nose, meanwhile, starting to look a little bit old-fashioned. It's out there on the grid. It is what it is, but you wonder how long they're going to keep that up and whether or not this nose may get their attention, as I think you've mentioned already.
Yeah, it will be interesting. The structure of the Ferrari nose and the way that they've laid the rest of the car out around the nose dimensions will probably make it quite hard for them to put a short nose on the car, and equally to put some holes in the nose that they have. They're probably quite happy with it. I mean, it's a very visual thing, but in terms of overall performance, I don't think it's the most important thing. Ferrari have introduced quite a lot of parts this weekend already, so I think the nose is probably not an area where they're losing too much sleep over.
Well, just before we get on to some of the Ferrari updates, the rest of the Force India car, what catches your attention?
Pretty much everything. I mean, the more you look at it, there's a couple of interesting things. First of all, the front wing and the front turning vanes under the nose, very Red Bull inspired. There's lots of the shapes and the details on there are very much from the Red Bull. The team have recruited staff from Red Bull. They have spent a lot of time looking at the performance of the Red Bull, and let's face it, over the past few years, it's not a bad direction to follow. So there is some inspiration there. Then the other thing is how much they've changed the back end of the car now to suit this B-spec. So they've got rid of the cooling ducts around the roll hoop. They've put the Mercedes power unit ERS cooler into the side pods rather than over the top of the gearbox. They're the only Mercedes power team to do that. They've lowered the exhaust over the gearbox. They've changed the rear wing mount. They've changed all the rear bodywork. Everything at the back of that car is different, and it's a huge amount of work for them to do during the season. And we have to accept that Force India are not the best resourced team in terms of people and money. So it's a fantastic job. They've managed to get so much done for this race.
Ferrari updates, and also quite a lot of work going on at Manor too. Good to see.
Yes, after Austria, where pretty much everyone had something, we were wondering whether this would be a race where we'd see lots of technical updates. Ferrari have got various bits and pieces on the car. They've got the existing long nose, as we know, but they've changed the front wing. And if you remember back in China, we were speaking about the Mercedes wing, where the little bump in the front profile out towards the wingtips was very square and quite abrupt on the Mercedes. Ferrari have now followed that, maybe not quite as extreme as Mercedes, but they are following that direction. And interestingly also on the Mercedes influences, they've changed their front camera mountings to very Mercedes-like ones, where it's just a very thin strut supporting the camera pod quite high up above the nose. So Ferrari not afraid to borrow ideas there. They've also got some changes to other changes around the front wing, the front brake ducts, and at the rear brake ducts. So they're doing a lot of work on that car race by race, and I don't think qualifying necessarily showed us the improvement. But I think when it comes to the race, I think the Ferrari would be a particularly good car, and they're chipping away at Mercedes.
And just to show how long it does take, though, to develop those parts, I think the new Mercedes camera mounts appeared. They certainly appeared in the Barcelona test. I'm trying to remember whether it was the pre-Australia, the last Barcelona test, or whether it was the first mid-season one. It was the last yeah, so it's taken that long for Ferrari to gestate those new mounts. And Manor.
Yes, Manor, we've been speaking to the team throughout the year, and the expectation was that they were going to take the strategy of designing what was going to be their 2015 car, actually to get that built in order to get the advantage of the new Ferrari power unit, which obviously early season had worked so well for improving Sauber's performance. Now seems that they're not going to do this. They're going to hold the car off until the winter, like everyone else has done. So instead, some of the updates that were due to be on, if you have to remember, they're running a 2014 car that's been very lightly updated to meet this year's regulations. But some of the updates that were designed for last year's car have now been manufactured and put onto this year's car, which is last year's car, so it'll get very confusing. And yeah, pretty much everything bodywork-wise from the cockpit backwards is all new. So it's all an all-new floor, barge boards, the top body, the diffuser, even some bits and pieces on the rear wing end plates, all new. And if we have to remember, this is a team that's running on a really minuscule budget, very small workforce, and they've actually manufactured all of these parts. And some led to believe that everything fitted perfectly first time. Normally, whenever you see a team fit a new bodywork, you'll hear the noise of grinders and Dremels buzzing away in the garage. Apparently, this fitted beautifully. They've obviously got a slightly different livery with some new sponsors this weekend, which is fantastic. And they feel that these updates have worked for them. It's not going to make them suddenly start chasing Sauber on pure pace, but it is a step in the right direction for the team, and all good luck to them for being able to produce something mid-season on such a tight budget.